steal.
15 points, 17 rebounds.
Say you're getting beat.
Yes, get him out of the...
Game 7 of the 1970 NBA Finals, Madison Square Garden. The New York Knicks against the Los Angeles Lakers, and everything that would define the franchise for the next 50 years riding on one game. Walt Frazier was 25 years old, and in the most consequential game his team would play that decade, he went for 36 points, 19 assists, and 7 rebounds. One of the most complete finals performances in NBA history delivered on the biggest stage, against a Lakers team that had Wilt Chamberlain at center. So when Walt Frazier talks about the greatest players he ever saw, that's the authority he's speaking from. Not a media credential or a metrics background. A two-time NBA champion who played against Wilt Chamberlain in the finals, who made the all-defensive first team 7 times, who watched every subsequent era of the sport from a courtside seat as a New York Knicks broadcaster. At 81, Frazier has evaluated basketball excellence from every angle the game can offer, and his conclusions about the 5 greatest players he ever saw look nothing like the list most people have been arguing about for the past 30 years, because Frazier doesn't start where the algorithm starts. He doesn't begin with championship counts stripped of context or scoring totals built in the era of 6-hour highlight packages, or the narrative gravity that builds when a player wins at the exact moment the league's global reach is at its peak. Frazier has criteria he has returned to across decades of interviews, singular physical dominance that no defensive scheme could fully neutralize, records that become almost impossible to look at without laughing, the ability to win collectively and defensively at the highest level, and the uncomfortable but essential question of who a player actually had to beat to reach his prime. By those standards, his list starts somewhere most modern conversations about this subject never seriously arrive. It starts with Wilt. Wilt Chamberlain finished his career with 2 championship rings. Michael Jordan won 6. LeBron James has 4. In a culture that has made the ring count the cleanest proxy for individual greatness, Wilt always ends up on the wrong side of the arithmetic. But Frazier has been rejecting that arithmetic for as long as anyone has been handing it to him. If I had to pick a guy, it would be Wilt Chamberlain, Frazier said. Because if you look at his records, it's hilarious. Nobody will approach any of his records, so he would be my guy. That word hilarious is exact, not just impressive, not just remarkable. Hilarious. Because the distance between what Wilt Chamberlain produced and what everyone else has ever produced in this sport is so large, it starts to feel like a fundamentally different game. Chamberlain played 14 seasons, from 1959 to 1973, across the Warriors, the 76ers, and the Lakers. His career averages were 30, 1 points, 22, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists per game, not peak numbers, career numbers. He shot 54% from the field. He won 4 regular season MVP awards. He led the league in assists one season because he had decided he could, and he could. And on March 2, 1962, in a game played in Hershey, Pennsylvania, before a crowd that barely filled the building, Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in a single game. That number sits outside the range of what the sport normally produces. It isn't approached. During that same 1961-62 season, Wilt averaged 4 points per game for the full year. He scored 50 or more in a game 118 times across his career. Jordan, who most people alive have watched be as dominant a scorer as the modern game has ever seen, did it 31 times. So when Frazier looks at these records and calls them hilarious, he is not reaching for hyperbole. He is being literal. But there is a second piece to Frazier's case for Wilt, and it's where the argument gets genuinely complicated. Wilt's 2 rings are usually presented as the damning asterisk on his legacy. Frazier has spent decades refusing that framing. Some have suggested that Wilt was not the greatest player ever because he only won 2 titles, Frazier said. This is simply unfair. If it weren't for the Celtics dynasty, Wilt would likely have ended up with 9 rings. Which is exactly why the man Frazier places second is the key to understanding the first. Bill Russell's Boston Celtics won 11 championships in 13 seasons. 11. From 1957 through 1969, including 8 consecutive from 1959 to 1966. Russell's team was a dynasty of a kind that professional sport had never produced before, and may never produce again, a franchise that didn't just win annually, but structurally prevented every other competitor from winning, including the most physically dominant center the game had ever seen. Season after season, Wilt Chamberlain, with all his records and all his force, ran into Bill Russell, and usually lost. In Frazier's reading, that's not a diminishment of Wilt. It is the central exhibit in the case for Russell. Bill Russell would be behind him, Frazier said. As a 7-time all-defensive first-team selection himself, Frazier evaluates Russell through a lens most analysts skip. He doesn't only see the 11 rings. He sees a defender who redefined what interior defense could look like across an entire team system. A rebounder who converted stops into fast breaks before the league had a common vocabulary for it, and most specifically. The only interior player in that entire era who could compete with Wilt Chamberlain without forcing his team to dismantle its defensive structure in the process. Everyone else doubled. Everyone else triple-teamed. Russell competed and won 5 MVP awards while doing it, and became the first black head coach in major American professional sports, while still winning titles as a player coach. The man Frazier places third, however, is the one he feels history has most consistently shortchanged. A guy who is always overlooked is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Frazier said. The skyhook is the most lethal weapon the game has ever seen. But when people talk about the greatest player, he's not even in the top 5. 20 seasons, 6 championships, 6 regular season MVP awards, the most in league history, 2 finals MVPs, an all-time scoring record that stood for nearly 4 decades, 38,387 points accumulated at 24. 6 per game with 11. 2 rebounds per game across a career that ran from 1969 to 1989. He was the first pick of the 1969 draft, won Rookie of the Year, won his first championship in only his second season alongside Oscar Robertson in Milwaukee, and kept winning for 2 more decades after that, claiming his 6th and final title at 41 years old with the Showtime Lakers. And the skyhook. Kareem refined a shot released from a height no defender could realistically contest, practiced and perfected across so many years that opponents who had seen it 10,000 times still couldn't stop it consistently. There has never been a more reliable offensive weapon in the history of this sport. In a different media era, against a different competitive backdrop, in a league built for highlights and individual branding, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would be the easiest first choice in any version of this conversation. If I had to choose one guy, Frazier said, I would say Kareem. He won at every level. He dominated in this game. He has 6 rings. He has the scoring title without even trying. If he had Wilt's mindset, he would have had 50,000 points. He was very team-oriented in what he did. Fourth on Frazier's list is a man who established the template for what a complete perimeter player could look like, and whose dominance shaped how Frazier understood his own position before he ever reached the NBA. Oscar Robertson was listed at 6'5", and played point guard in an era that had no real concept of what a 6'5" point guard could do. His career averages 25. 7 points, 7, 5 rebounds, 9. 5 assists per game across 1,040 games. Place him in a conversation almost no other perimeter player in NBA history can enter. But the number that defines his legacy came in the 1961-62 season. 30, 8 points, 12, 5 rebounds, and 11. 4 assists per game sustained across an entire year. A full season triple-double average. Nobody had done it before. He led the league in assists 6 times, won an MVP in 1964, and finally earned a championship ring in 1971 alongside a young Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in Milwaukee, 2 of the players on Frazier's list eventually occupying the same finals roster. For Frazier, who spent his career at the same position trying to dominate both ends of the floor, Robertson represented the structural model for what the position could demand. Not a scorer who also distributed. Not a distributor who could score. A player who controlled every dimension of the game simultaneously against the best competition his era produced across 14 seasons. That's Frazier's definition of versatility, and by it, Robertson earns the 4th spot. And then there's Jordan. Michael Jordan's resume doesn't require explanation. 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls, 6 finals MVP awards, 5 regular season MVPs, 10 scoring titles, 9 all-defensive first-team selections. A career average near 30 points per game. Performances that have been watched and rewatched so many times, they've become reference points for what individual brilliance inside a basketball game is supposed to look like. Frazier puts Jordan in the top 5. He acknowledges the magnitude of what Jordan accomplished. Up there too, well-deserved, he said when asked about Jordan's place among the game's all-time greats. He is not dismissing the winning or the scoring or the two-way dominance. But Frazier is very specific about the limit of the automatic greatest of all-time argument. Jordan had no true rival, he has said, and that phrase carries the weight of everything that came before it. Wilt Chamberlain had Bill Russell, 11 titles in 13 seasons. A dynasty assembled from Hall of Famers. An opponent who showed up at Wilt's most physically dominant and repeatedly sent him home. The competition Wilt faced at his peak was as formidable as the sport has ever produced, and he still fell short often enough that his ring count became the standard case against his legacy. Jordan faced elite competition, the bad boy Detroit Pistons, who blocked his path through the Eastern Conference for years before he finally broke through then Clyde Drexler's Portland Trail Blazers in the finals, Charles Barkley's Suns, Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp in Seattle, John Stockton and Karl Malone in back-to-back Utah finals. He earned every championship, but there was no equivalent dynasty waiting, no sustained multi-year rival at his absolute peak the way Russell stood at Wilt's, in Frazier's frame. That matters. Championships can't be separated from the road it took to reach them. Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Oscar Robertson, Michael Jordan. 5 names from a man who built his life inside this sport, who played against the best of one generation, broadcast the best of several more, and arrived at 81 still arguing from the same criteria he has carried for decades. The question isn't who had the cleanest highlight package, or the most rings at face value, or the most dominant run in the league's most watched era. The question is dominance that couldn't be solved, winning that required something genuinely difficult to achieve, and records that stop making sense the longer you stare at them. And by those standards, the 5 greatest players Walt Frazier ever saw look exactly like that.